What if everything you believed about the very foundations of human history, the neat timelines etched into textbooks and lectured in hallowed university halls, was not merely incomplete, but a meticulously constructed fiction? Imagine for a moment the quiet, unyielding certainty that underpins our understanding of who we are and where we come from, suddenly fracturing into a million pieces, revealing a chasm of unsettling possibilities. This is not a fanciful tale spun for entertainment. It is the stark reality that faced Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman whose life was irrevocably altered by a discovery so profound, so utterly incongruous with established wisdom, that it threatened to unravel the delicate tapestry of global consensus. Her journey began not in some exotic, remote wilderness, but in the wind-swept, rain-lashed expanse of the Scottish Highlands, a landscape as ancient and unforgiving as the secrets it held. Evelyn, a paleontologist of formidable intellect and an almost obsessive attention to detail, had always found solace in the tangible truths unearthed from the earth. Her career, marked by a series of groundbreaking but orthodox findings, had earned her a quiet respect within her field, placing her firmly among the sensible academics who preferred peer-reviewed evidence to speculative flights of fancy. She was the sort of person who took her tea with a splash of milk, precisely 2 sugars, and her research with an equal measure of methodical rigor. Her current project, an extensive survey of a previously unexplored glacial valley near Ullapool, seemed destined to yield predictable if valuable insights into late Pleistocene flora and fauna. The weather, typically British and utterly miserable, did little to dampen her spirits. A good drizzle and a bit of mud were simply part of the job. Yet as the digging season wore on, an undercurrent of unease began to ripple through the seemingly mundane routine. Small anomalies surfaced, geological strata that didn't quite align with expectations, mineral compositions that hinted at stresses far beyond natural forces, and a strange, almost imperceptible hum that occasionally permeated the air during deep excavations, dismissed by the team as equipment malfunction or an overactive imagination. But Evelyn's imagination was rarely overactive. It was fiercely analytical. These subtle discrepancies, initially dismissed by her more pragmatic field assistants as minor irritations, began to coalesce in her mind. She saw patterns where others saw noise, feeling the faint tremor of something extraordinary lurking just beneath the surface. A feeling akin to finding a rogue chess piece in a well-ordered drawer, hinting at a game played by rules unknown. The air grew heavy, not just with the impending rain, but with a palpable sense of anticipation, a quiet dread. She often found herself staring out over the desolate landscape, the ancient hills shrouded in mist, wondering what millennia of silent observation they had endured, what forgotten histories lay entombed beneath their grey, unforgiving rock. Was it possible, she mused, that the earth itself harboured memories, not just of dinosaurs and ice ages, but of something far more disruptive to the human narrative? The question, once an academic abstraction, was beginning to feel terrifyingly real. The team had been excavating a particularly deep trench, following a curious vein of oddly vitrified rock, when the first truly inexplicable object was discovered. It wasn't a bone, nor a tool, nor any recognized geological formation. It was a shard, obsidian black and impossibly smooth, with a subtle curve that suggested part of a much larger, perfectly engineered whole. Its surface, under the harsh beam of a headlamp, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, creating a disturbing void in the visual field. Dr. Alistair Finch, Evelyn's second-in-command, a man renowned for his unflappable demeanour and a penchant for dry wit, picked it up, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Bloody hell, Evelyn," he'd muttered, turning it over in his gloved hand. "What in blazes is this? Looks like something fallen off a crashed alien craft, doesn't it?" He meant it as a joke, a light-hearted jab at the absurd, but Evelyn felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The shard was too perfect, too anomalous to be natural. Its edges were impossibly sharp, yet not abrasive, its weight surprisingly dense for its size. It radiated an almost imperceptible chill, even in Alistair's gloved hand. This was no ordinary rock. The initial tests conducted on site with portable spectrographs yielded baffling results. The material composition defied known terrestrial elements, hinting at an alloy or compound that didn't fit into any geological or metallurgical catalogue. Its atomic structure seemed unnervingly stable, almost inert, yet it possessed a faint internal luminescence that flickered erratically, like a trapped firefly. Evelyn immediately ceased all other excavation work, redirecting the team's entire focus to the precise location of the shard's origin. The mood in the camp shifted from casual archaeological pursuit to an intense, almost feverish investigation. Every shovelful of soil, every rock fragment, was scrutinized with a meticulousness bordering on paranoia. The remote valley, once a place of quiet scientific endeavor, began to feel like a crucible, forging an inescapable truth. The silence of the Scottish wilderness, previously soothing, now felt oppressive, as if the land itself held its breath, witnessing an unveiling it had kept hidden for millennia. The question, then, is not merely what they found, but what it means for every single one of us. What would you do if you discovered that everything you knew about our past, our very existence, was fundamentally, shockingly wrong? This isn't just a story about an ancient object. It's about the seismic shift in understanding it represents. If this has piqued your interest, if it has sent a shiver down your spine, then you're exactly where you need to be. This channel consistently brings you content that challenges perceptions and unearths uncomfortable truths. So please, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. What comes next in Evelyn's journey is a plunge into depths far more profound than any she could have imagined. Leave a comment below with your initial thoughts on what this discovery might signify. We value your insights, and your engagement helps us bring these vital, often unsettling narratives to light. The story is far from over. In fact, it has only just begun. The shard was merely the first whisper of a monumental secret, a tantalizing fragment that hinted at a much larger, impossibly complex structure buried deep within the Scottish bedrock. Evelyn and her team, now working with an almost frantic intensity, meticulously expanded their excavation, following the faint, almost psychic trail left by the peculiar material. The glacial valley, once thought to be a relatively straightforward paleontological site, transformed under their trowels and brushes into a geological puzzle box. The ground beneath their feet began to reveal anomalies at an alarming rate. Perfectly straight lines, cut into ancient granite that no natural process could account for, patterns of erosion that defied established geomorphology, and an increasing frequency of the obsidian black fragments, each one geometrically precise, almost machine-tooled in their perfection. Alistair, despite his initial levity, grew increasingly somber. His scientific mind, trained in the rigorous disciplines of geology and stratigraphy, struggled to reconcile the evidence appearing before his eyes with everything he had ever been taught. "It's like finding a microchip in a Roman villa," he'd murmured one blustery afternoon, carefully extracting a larger, curved piece that fitted snugly with the initial shard. "No, worse, it's like finding a fully functional smartphone embedded in dinosaur fossil." The sheer audacity of the discovery was dizzying. Dating the surrounding geological layers placed the object firmly in the late Precambrian or early Cambrian period, hundreds of millions of years before the first hominids, long before complex life as we understand it even began to flourish on Earth. This wasn't merely out of place, it was fundamentally impossible. The implications were a heavy weight, pressing down on Evelyn's shoulders, eclipsing the thrill of scientific breakthrough with a growing sense of dread. As more of the structure was uncovered, its scale became apparent. It wasn't a small device, it was an immense subterranean complex, intricately constructed from the same enigmatic material. Massive, interlocking panels formed walls and ceilings, their surfaces still gleaming faintly despite the unimaginable antiquity. The air within the exposed sections was eerily still, devoid of the musty smell of ancient earth, instead carrying a faint metallic tang, almost like ozone after a lightning strike. The team members, a mixture of seasoned archaeologists and eager young graduates from universities like Durham and Bristol, moved with a quiet reverence, their initial excitement gradually replaced by a profound sense of awe and apprehension. They were touching something truly alien, something that whispered of an intelligence far beyond human comprehension, existing at a time when Earth was a primordial soup, not a cradle of civilization. Evelyn, working tirelessly, often through the night in the temporary lab tent, began to map the structure. She found intricate conduits running through the walls, impossibly thin, hair-like filaments that seemed to glow with a faint internal light when exposed to certain frequencies. There were no discernible seams, no mortar, no evidence of conventional construction techniques. It was as if the entire complex had been grown from the earth itself, or forged by a single impossible act of creation. The sheer engineering prowess hinted at by the structure dwarfed anything humanity had ever conceived, making the pyramids seem like children's building blocks. Her sleep became sporadic, haunted by visions of colossal, silent machinery operating in an age when the world was a canvas, yet to be painted with life. The lines of her face, usually etched with thoughtful concentration, now showed signs of deep strain, a silent battle waged against the encroaching implications of her discovery. The material itself presented a formidable challenge. Standard drills and cutting tools simply bounced off its surface, leaving no mark. It was impervious to heat, cold, and corrosive acids. Only a specially adapted high-frequency sonic cutter, usually reserved for industrial-grade alloys, managed to make a barely perceptible scratch, accompanied by a chilling, resonant hum that vibrated through the very ground. This resilience, combined with its anomalous elemental composition, placed it squarely outside the realm of known science. It was as if they had stumbled upon a piece of a forgotten god's workshop, a relic from an epoch that was simply not supposed to have existed. What kind of civilization could have crafted such a thing? What purpose did it serve, buried so deep, so carefully hidden from the nascent world evolving above? These questions hammered at Evelyn's mind, relentless and terrifying. One afternoon, as a typical Highland squall lashed against the protective tarpaulins, a particularly large section of the complex was uncovered. It revealed what appeared to be a vast, circular chamber, its walls adorned with an intricate pattern of glowing symbols. Unlike any known script or pictograph, they pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic luminescence, casting long, dancing shadows across the ancient floor. The air inside the chamber felt different, charged, almost alive. It was then, standing amidst the impossible grandeur of this prehistoric monument, that Evelyn truly grasped the scale of her discovery. This wasn't just a relic, it was a revelation, a silent scream across the eons, shattering every established dogma. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of mingled terror and exhilaration. Have you ever felt that profound, gut-wrenching moment when your entire worldview shifts irrevocably and violently? It's a sensation that stays with you, a constant echo in the quiet corners of your mind. The team, too, felt the shift. Alistair, usually so grounded, began to show signs of intense internal conflict. He'd spend hours staring at the glowing symbols, sketching them meticulously, muttering theories to himself that grew increasingly outlandish, yet disturbingly plausible. The younger researchers, initially thrilled by the prospect of a career-defining find, began to look at Evelyn with a mixture of fear and awe. They knew intuitively that they were part of something monumental, something that would either redefine history or be violently suppressed. The camaraderie that had once defined the camp slowly dissolved, replaced by a tense, almost paranoid atmosphere. Whispers circulated about what would happen when the news eventually broke, about the potential for ridicule, disbelief, or something far worse. The scientific purity of the endeavor was slowly being corrupted by the sheer weight of its implications. Evelyn understood the danger. A discovery of this magnitude couldn't simply be published in Nature or Science without causing seismic shockwaves through academia, theology, and geopolitics. It would challenge the very notion of human exceptionalism, questioning our place in the cosmic order. It would invalidate countless scientific theories, undermine religious doctrines, and potentially destabilize the fragile socio-political structures that relied on a shared, unchallenged history. This knowledge, she realized with a chilling certainty, was not merely extraordinary, it was forbidden. The burden of this truth, heavier than any rock she had ever lifted, settled firmly upon her shoulders, promising a future of impossible choices and profound solitude. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that the quiet academic life she had built for herself was now irrevocably shattered. The earth had yielded its secret, and now it was Evelyn's impossible task to decide what to do with it. What choice would you make if you held a truth that could either enlighten or destroy the world? The news, even in its most tightly guarded iterations, was impossible to contain entirely. Like an insidious virus, whispers of the Highland anomaly began to circulate through the hallowed, often gossipy corridors of academia. Initially, it was dismissed as rumor, a sensationalized fabrication from a fringe archaeologist, a common enough occurrence in a field prone to both brilliant insight and audacious fraud. Dr. Evelyn Reed, known for her rigorous methodology, found herself subjected to an increasingly subtle yet relentless campaign of professional doubt. Emails, once filled with requests for collaboration or invitations to prestigious conferences, now carried a distinct tone of cautious inquiry, then outright skepticism. Colleagues who had once lauded her analytical precision now spoke of unsubstantiated claims and questionable interpretations of geological data. Professor Alastair Finch, Evelyn's closest confidant and a highly respected geologist in his own right, found himself caught in the crosscurrents. His initial enthusiasm, recorded in his meticulous field notes, was now being questioned by his university's ethics committee. He faced thinly veiled accusations of being unduly influenced by Evelyn's radical theories, his professional reputation slowly eroding under the weight of academic suspicion. The insidious nature of the Whisper campaign was its refusal to directly confront the evidence. Instead, it focused on undermining the credibility of the researchers, questioning their motives, their mental stability, and even their sobriety. Articles in obscure but influential academic journals began to appear, subtly discrediting Evelyn's past work, dissecting it for minor flaws and blowing them up into monumental errors. The unspoken message was clear. Reed was losing her touch, and her latest discovery was simply a manifestation of intellectual decline. The first direct consequence came swiftly. Evelyn's grant funding, usually a stable and reliable stream, was suddenly frozen, citing unforeseen budgetary constraints and a reassessment of research priorities. The field team, many of whom were on temporary contracts, began to drift away, unable to sustain themselves without pay. The young graduates, once brimming with idealistic zeal, found their academic futures threatened, their involvement with the Highland anomaly becoming a scarlet letter on their CVs. They were tacitly advised by senior faculty members to distance themselves from Evelyn and her increasingly controversial work if they wished to pursue careers in a field that valued orthodoxy above all else. This erosion of support left Evelyn isolated, her once bustling camp now eerily quiet, save for the incessant wind whistling through the tarpaulins. Then came the less subtle pressures. Unannounced inspections from various governmental agencies, ostensibly concerned with environmental impact or health and safety regulations, became a regular occurrence. They scrutinized every piece of equipment, every permit, every logistical detail, creating bureaucratic hurdles designed to slow, if not halt, the excavation entirely. Evelyn found herself spending more time filling out paperwork and defending her methods than actually researching. Her data, stored on encrypted university servers, began to show signs of tampering. Files would inexplicably corrupt, backups would mysteriously vanish, and access logs showed unauthorized attempts to penetrate her personal research drives. It was a digital assault, relentless and invisible, designed to steal or destroy the evidence before it could ever see the light of day. The most unnerving incidents, however, were the personal ones. Evelyn's flat in Edinburgh, usually a sanctuary of quiet, scholarly pursuit, felt increasingly exposed. Strange vehicles would be parked for hours across the street. Her post, once predictable, began to include anonymous letters, some threatening, others simply cryptic warnings to "let sleeping giants lie." Her beloved black Labrador, Hamish, a loyal companion for years, became unusually agitated, barking at shadows, whimpering inexplicably at night. She even suspected her phone calls were being monitored, the faint clicks and pauses confirming her growing paranoia. This wasn't just professional jealousy. It was an organized, concerted effort to silence her, to make the discovery vanish as if it had never been. One evening, while working late in the makeshift lab tent, a sleek, dark Range Rover pulled up to the excavation site, its powerful engine cutting through the highland quiet. Two impeccably dressed individuals emerged, their faces unreadable, their movements precise. They introduced themselves as representatives of a private security consultancy interested in the preservation of national heritage sites. Evelyn, her guard raised, knew instantly they were nothing of the sort. Their questions were too specific, too probing, displaying an intimate knowledge of her research that no mere security consultants would possess. They spoke in veiled threats, hinting at serious national implications if the site were not handled with the utmost discretion and control. They offered her a significant sum, a research grant so generous it was almost insulting, in exchange for her complete silence and the handover of all data and artifacts. Evelyn, despite the fear gripping her, refused. Her moral compass, honed over decades of scientific integrity, would not allow her to betray the truth. She understood, however, that her refusal had escalated the stakes dramatically. The polite facade had cracked, revealing the menacing machinery beneath. What choice would you make when offered immense wealth for your silence, knowing that the truth you hold could shatter the world as we know it? It's an agonizing dilemma, one that forces a re-evaluation of personal ethics against collective consequence. The burden of her knowledge, initially a scientific puzzle, had transformed into a crushing moral quandary. The forbidden discovery was no longer just an object. It was a battleground, and Evelyn Reed, a quiet paleontologist, found herself on the front lines, fighting against forces far more powerful than she could have ever imagined. The cold wind whipping around her felt like the chilling breath of a world that desperately wanted its secrets to remain buried. Write in the comments, "This is unbelievable," if you can imagine the sheer pressure Evelyn was under. Your thoughts on such ethical tightropes are invaluable to the ongoing discussion of hidden truths. The withdrawal of funding, the insidious whisper campaign, the relentless bureaucratic intrusions, and the veiled threats all converged into a suffocating pressure. Evelyn found herself increasingly isolated, a lone sentinel guarding a truth that few wished to acknowledge. Her once thriving excavation site in the Scottish Highlands was now a desolate testament to academic suppression, most of her team having dispersed, their dreams of groundbreaking discovery crushed under the weight of institutional censure. Only Professor Alastair Finch, his own career teetering on the brink, remained a loyal, if increasingly weary, ally. Together, they became a two-person vanguard against an unseen enemy, battling the slow strangulation of their research. The private security consultancy, as they had called themselves, evolved into a persistent, unsettling presence. Their dark vehicles now regularly patrolled the perimeter of the increasingly restricted site. Drones, silently humming against the grey highland sky, conducted aerial surveillance, their unblinking eyes recording every movement. Evelyn and Alistair were effectively under siege, their access to external resources dwindling, their communications scrutinized. Even trips to the nearest village for supplies felt like a clandestine operation. Every shadow a potential observer, every casual glance a possible threat. The sense of paranoia, once a nascent seed, blossomed into a full-blown, justified vigilance. Despite the pervasive harassment, Evelyn's intellectual curiosity burned brighter than ever. She knew that simply preserving the site was not enough. She had to understand what it was. Her focus shifted from excavation to intense analysis of the recovered fragments and the limited access she still had to the subterranean chamber. Working from makeshift labs in the depths of the complex, powered by a constantly dwindling supply of generators, she and Alastair meticulously catalogued every symbol, every intricate conduit, every peculiar property of the anomalous material. The sheer resilience of the substance continued to baffle them. They found that subjecting the glowing symbols to specific light frequencies caused them to pulse brighter, revealing subtle shifts in their intricate patterns, as if reacting to an ancient command. One particularly arduous week, amidst of fierce gales that rattled the makeshift structures of their camp, Alastair made a critical observation. He noticed that the internal luminescence of the material, though faint, seemed to emanate in precise geometric patterns within the larger structural panels. "It's not just a pattern, Evelyn," he'd announced, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep and the incessant wind. "It's a circuit. A living circuit, almost. Look at the energy transfer here, how it seems to flow from one panel to the next, like blood through veins." His geological background, combined with a keen understanding of physics, allowed him to see beyond the archaeological wonder to the underlying engineering. He began to map these energy conduits, creating a sprawling, complex diagram that resembled a neural network more than a building plan. Evelyn, building upon Alastair's insight, theorized that the entire subterranean complex wasn't just a structure. It was a gigantic, self-sustaining machine. The glowing symbols weren't merely decoration. They were an interface, a control panel of sorts, perhaps even a form of ancient language designed to interact with the device. They spent weeks attempting to decipher the patterns, comparing them to obscure ancient languages, forgotten mathematical systems, even complex biological algorithms, all to no avail. The symbols defied all known human interpretation. The sense of utter alienness, of confronting an intelligence truly beyond human ken, was both exhilarating and profoundly humbling. What sort of civilization could build something so intricate, so enduring, yet so utterly inscrutable? And why was it hidden beneath hundreds of millions of years of rock? The deeper they delved into the functionality of the complex, the clearer it became that this was not merely a passive relic. The faint, rhythmic hum that had been dismissed earlier by the team was in fact the machine's dormant pulse, a subtle thrumming that grew perceptibly stronger the more they experimented with the light frequencies. The air within the main chamber, once merely still, now felt subtly charged, causing the fine hairs on their arms to stand on end. They began to experience strange phenomena, fleeting images in their peripheral vision, faint, almost telepathic whispers that seemed to emanate from the glowing symbols, and a pervasive sense of being observed by something vast and ancient. The object wasn't just there. It was aware, perhaps even sentient, in a way they couldn't comprehend. This growing understanding of the device's properties only intensified the external pressure. The security consultants became bolder, their inquiries more aggressive, their surveillance more intrusive. They even made attempts to breach the perimeter, only to be deterred by Alistair's surprisingly effective, if rudimentary, booby traps and Evelyn's unyielding resolve. They knew their time was running out. The forces ranged against them were growing impatient, no longer content with subtle suppression. They wanted the site, and everything within it, under their complete control, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to achieve it. One evening, after a particularly frightening encounter with an unknown drone that hovered silently just outside their tent for an hour, Evelyn stared at the complex map of energy conduits Alistair had drawn. "It's a power source, Alistair," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "Or a communication array. Or both." The implications of such a device, from an era when single-celled organisms were dominant, were mind-boggling. It challenged everything about the origin of life, the development of intelligence, and humanity's perceived uniqueness. The sheer scale of this forbidden knowledge, the burden it represented, was becoming almost unbearable. She felt a profound sense of isolation, burdened by a secret that could either ignite a new era of understanding or plunge the world into chaos. What do you think would happen if such a discovery were revealed to the public without warning? Would it lead to enlightenment or widespread panic? Comment below if you've also thought about this. The sheer scale of the potential fallout is terrifying. The next phase of Evelyn's struggle would push her to the absolute limits of her endurance, forcing her to confront not just the ancient past, but a very modern and very dangerous conspiracy. As the grip of the custodians of orthodoxy tightened, Evelyn's reliance on established academic channels dwindled to nothing. Her university affiliation was all but severed, her reputation shredded in the eyes of the mainstream. Forced to abandon the official excavation site, which was now under complete lockdown by a shadowy agency, Evelyn and Alistair found themselves operating entirely off the grid. They salvaged what portable equipment they could, along with a trove of data logs, photographs, and meticulous sketches of the Highland complex. Their sanctuary became a series of rented flats in nondescript towns across the UK, moving every few weeks to avoid detection, funded by Alistair's rapidly diminishing life savings and Evelyn's desperate sales of her family heirlooms. In this clandestine existence, Evelyn delved deeper into the enigma of the Highland complex. She knew that to counter the formidable forces arrayed against them, she needed more than just raw data. She needed context, a narrative that explained the impossible. Her research became a desperate hunt for anomalies, for the whispers of other forbidden discoveries buried beneath layers of historical revisionism. She scoured ancient texts, obscure archaeological reports, and forgotten folk tales, searching for any echo of the impossible material, any hint of a pre-human civilization, or any suggestion of a concerted effort to suppress such knowledge throughout history. Her unconventional methods began to yield unsettling results. Through contacts in the illicit antiquities market, individuals operating far outside the ethical boundaries of mainstream archaeology, she gained access to artifacts that bore an unnerving resemblance to the Highland material. A small, perfectly spherical object found in a Siberian permafrost core, carbon-dated to an impossible age. A shard of what looked like obsidian-black glass recovered from a deep-sea trench, displaying the same anomalous atomic structure. These scattered pieces, often dismissed as hoaxes or geological curiosities by the official record, formed a terrifying mosaic in Evelyn's mind. They suggested not just a single, isolated anomaly, but a pervasive, global pattern of suppression, a concerted effort to erase a fundamental truth from human memory. Alistair, meanwhile, focused on the physics and engineering aspects. Using salvaged equipment and his formidable intellect, he developed a rudimentary decoder for the energy patterns they had observed on the glowing symbols. His breakthroughs were slow, painstaking, and often frustrating, but they eventually began to reveal a recurring sequence, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from all the anomalous artifacts they studied, including the data from the Highland complex. "It's a signature, Evelyn," he'd announced one dreary afternoon in a rented room overlooking the Bristol Channel. "A unique energy frequency, like a heartbeat, but from something utterly alien." This signature, he theorized, was the machine's language, a universal frequency that allowed it to interact with other similar objects, and perhaps even with consciousness itself. This language became Evelyn's Rosetta Stone. She began to correlate Alistair's energy signatures with patterns found in ancient religious iconography, in forgotten astronomical charts, even in the intricate designs of megalithic structures like Stonehenge. The connections were tenuous at first, dismissed by her as pareidolia, but as more correlations emerged, they became undeniable. The symbols from the Highland complex, once utterly alien, began to reveal faint echoes in seemingly unrelated historical artifacts. Could it be that humanity, throughout its history, had unknowingly stumbled upon remnants of this ancient intelligence, encoding its signs in their own nascent forms of communication? The idea was audacious, terrifying, and exhilarating. Her research led her to a pivotal moment when she uncovered a series of obscure manuscripts preserved in the dusty archives of an old monastery in rural Northumberland. These texts, written in archaic Latin and forgotten Anglo-Saxon dialects, spoke of the Watchers, the silent engineers of the dawn, and the Great Forgetting. They described a powerful, self-aware technology buried beneath the earth, capable of influencing thought and shaping reality, a technology that predated humanity and periodically awoke. The manuscripts warned of a clandestine order, the keepers of the old ways, who devoted themselves to ensuring this knowledge remained hidden, believing humanity was too fragile, too susceptible to chaos, to comprehend its true origins. This ancient order, Evelyn realized, was the predecessor to her contemporary tormentors, the custodians of orthodoxy. They weren't merely suppressing a single discovery. They were maintaining a millennia-old cover-up, systematically erasing evidence of a fundamental truth that challenged human exceptionalism. The burden of knowledge now extended beyond her own personal peril to encompass the entire hidden history of humanity. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, knowing that countless others before her had likely stumbled upon similar truths, only to be silenced, their discoveries meticulously erased from the annals of time. What price, she pondered, has humanity paid for this carefully constructed ignorance, and what would it cost to finally shatter it? The implication was staggering. Humanity was not the first, nor perhaps the most advanced, intelligence to walk this planet. The Highland complex and the scattered anomalies Evelyn had found were relics of a prior civilization, a precursor so ancient it existed before our very concept of time. The device, she concluded, was a repository, a silent witness, perhaps even a failsafe left behind by this forgotten race. The thought was both exhilarating and profoundly humbling. It meant that human history, as taught and understood, was a meticulously curated lie, protecting us from a truth so immense it could crush our collective ego. Evelyn now had a framework, a context for her forbidden discovery. But with this understanding came an even greater sense of dread. She was no longer just a scientist. She was a custodian of a truth that had been suppressed for eons, and the keepers of the old ways, or their modern iteration, knew she had found it. The game, she knew, had just escalated. Do you believe that humanity is truly ready to confront truths that challenge its perceived dominance? Share your thoughts below. This isn't just a story. It's a reflection on our own capacity for self-deception and resilience. Evelyn's clandestine research, meticulously piecing together the fragmented echoes of a forgotten past, inevitably drew the renewed and far more aggressive attention of the custodians of orthodoxy. Her ability to operate beneath their radar, coupled with Alistair's breakthroughs in deciphering the machine's language, proved too significant a threat. They had found her, not through conventional surveillance, but through the digital footprints she inadvertently left while accessing obscure databases, or perhaps, as Evelyn chillingly suspected, through the very energy signature the ancient devices emitted. The subtle pressures and veiled threats of before gave way to a direct, terrifying confrontation. It happened in a nondescript flat in a sleepy coastal town in Cornwall, a place Evelyn had chosen for its isolation and the soothing rhythm of the sea. She and Alistair were deeply immersed in their work, Alistair excitedly demonstrating how the decoded energy patterns correlated with a bizarre ancient pictogram he'd found in a forgotten academic text, when the door splintered inward with a deafening crash. A squad of black-clad figures, moving with chilling precision and equipped with what appeared to be highly advanced non-lethal weaponry, stormed the flat. They were not police. Their uniforms bore no insignia. Their faces were impassive, hidden behind dark visors. This was a paramilitary operation executed with ruthless efficiency. Evelyn and Alistair, caught completely off guard, were quickly subdued. Their laptops, hard drives, and all their painstakingly gathered research were immediately confiscated. Evelyn, however, managed a desperate last-second act of defiance, activating a hidden, encrypted data burst, sending a fraction of their most critical findings into the digital ether, hoping it might find a safe harbor. It was a gamble, a desperate plea into the void, with no guarantee of success. She later understood that this small act of rebellion, this refusal to surrender utterly, would be both her salvation and her curse. They were transported, blindfolded and bound, to a remote, undisclosed facility. Evelyn couldn't be certain of its location, but the damp, cold air, the distant cry of gulls, and the unmistakable scent of salt and ancient stone suggested somewhere isolated on the British coastline. Here, in this chilling crucible, she came face to face with the true nature of the custodians. Their leader, a formidable woman with piercing, intelligent eyes and an aura of absolute authority, introduced herself only as the Gatekeeper. Her voice was calm, measured, devoid of emotion, yet it carried the weight of centuries of hidden power. The Gatekeeper did not threaten, she explained. She laid bare the custodian's mission to protect humanity from itself, to prevent the catastrophic destabilization that the truth of the forbidden discovery would unleash. She spoke of past civilizations, not human, but progenitors who had risen and fallen, consumed by the very knowledge they sought to master. The Highland Complex, she revealed, was not just a machine. It was a reality anchor, a device designed to maintain the delicate balance of Earth's temporal and spatial integrity, a relic of a time when the very fabric of existence was far more fluid and malleable. The activation of such devices, or the widespread knowledge of their existence, she argued, could lead to an irreversible collapse of established reality, a fragmentation of consciousness itself. Evelyn listened, her mind reeling, struggling to reconcile the chilling narrative with her scientific drive for truth. The Gatekeeper's logic, cold and unyielding, was terrifyingly coherent. She presented evidence, holographic projections of ancient catastrophes, images of chaotic temporal shifts, and the unsettling data of mass societal breakdowns, all attributed to humanity's premature encounters with this forbidden knowledge. The custodians, she asserted, were not villains, but guardians, ensuring the continued survival of the human species by maintaining a carefully constructed, comfortable ignorance. "We are the bulwark against madness, Doctor. Read," the Gatekeeper stated, her gaze unwavering. "Your discovery, in its raw form, is a weapon of unimaginable destruction. It is a truth humanity is not yet evolved enough to comprehend, let alone wield responsibly. Alistair, visibly shaken but still defiant, challenged her, arguing that humanity deserved to know its true heritage, that suppression was tyranny. But the gatekeeper simply smiled, a thin, humorless curve of her lips. Tyranny is a small price to pay for existence, Professor Finch. We offer you a choice. Join us, help us manage this knowledge, or be erased from history, your discovery buried forever, just like all the others before you. The weight of this proposition was immense. It wasn't just a threat to their lives, it was a threat to their very legacy, to the decades of work they had poured into uncovering this truth. Evelyn, however, saw a flaw in the gatekeeper's argument, a crack in the seemingly impenetrable logic. While the narrative of catastrophic destabilization was compelling, it was also one of ultimate control. The custodians held not just the secret, but the power to define reality itself. Who were they to decide what humanity was ready for? Her scientific integrity rebelled against such absolute authoritarianism. The burden of knowledge now included not just the truth itself, but the moral imperative to ensure it was not twisted or controlled by a select few. The chilling implications of the gatekeeper's statements sent a wave of icy dread through her. Have you ever felt that profound moral conflict, where the line between good and evil blurs into shades of grey, and the choice you make defines not just yourself, but potentially the fate of others? It's a terrifying crossroads. The revelation of the custodians' true purpose and the gravity of their claims only deepened the ethical labyrinth Evelyn found herself trapped within. She understood now that her fight was not merely against academic skepticism, but against a powerful ancient order determined to maintain its grip on human consciousness for reasons they believed were righteous, but which to Evelyn felt like ultimate subjugation. The confrontation with the gatekeeper at the clandestine facility marked a terrifying turning point. Evelyn and Alistair were now prisoners, their freedom stripped away, their research confiscated. Yet, in the chilling silence of their confinement, Evelyn's scientific mind, honed by years of meticulous observation, continued to work. She replayed the gatekeeper's words, scrutinizing every nuance, every calculated pause. The custodian's claims of protecting humanity from existential chaos, of preserving a carefully constructed reality, were compelling, but they also hinted at a deeper, more profound truth about the Highland complex itself. It wasn't just a passive relic, it was an active participant in reality, a linchpin. Confined to a sterile, soundproof cell, Evelyn was denied access to her notes, her data, and even Alistair. But her memory was a fortress, her intellect an unyielding weapon. She began to reconstruct the intricate energy patterns Alistair had decoded, correlating them with the cryptic symbols from the Highland complex. The gatekeeper's reference to the complex as a reality anchor and its ability to influence temporal and spatial integrity resonated with Evelyn's own evolving theories. What if the device wasn't merely a repository of forbidden knowledge, but also a mechanism for its suppression? What if it actively erased anomalies from the collective consciousness, smoothing out the rough edges of history to create the coherent narrative humanity clung to? This terrifying hypothesis began to coalesce in her mind. The faint, almost subliminal hum they had observed at the excavation site, the unsettling sense of being watched, the glitches in data, all could be explained if the complex was indeed an active system, not just an inert relic. Its purpose, she theorized, was not just to store ancient knowledge, but to filter it, to maintain the veil of illusion that protected humanity from truths it was deemed incapable of handling. This was the true nature of the forbidden discovery, not just the revelation of a forgotten past, but the active process by which that past was suppressed. The burden of knowledge wasn't just what she knew, but how that knowledge was being systematically erased, even as she discovered it. Her breakthrough came during one of her enforced recreational periods, a short walk in a heavily guarded courtyard. She noticed the rhythmic flash of a distant lighthouse beam, its pulse consistent, yet subtly varied in its intensity. A sudden thought struck her, a lightning bolt of insight. The ancient symbols on the Highland complex, which she and Alistair had been trying to interpret as a language, were not meant for direct translation. They were a frequency modulator, a set of instructions, a key to activate or deactivate the reality anchor. The faint luminescence of the symbols, their subtle shifts in pattern, were not just a display, they were a dynamic interface, a command console. The implications of this were seismic. If the complex was indeed an active anchor, capable of reshaping reality or collective memory, then controlling it would grant immense power. The custodians were not just guarding a secret, they were wielding a secret, manipulating the very fabric of human understanding for what they believed was humanity's own good. Evelyn understood now why her discovery was so dangerous to them. It wasn't just the what, it was the how. Her research threatened to expose their ultimate mechanism of control, to peel back the layers of carefully crafted reality. She painstakingly re-examined all the data she could recall, visualizing the intricate conduits, the glowing symbols, the precise frequencies Alistair had begun to decipher. A new theory emerged, both terrifying and exhilarating. The reality anchor was susceptible to specific energetic inputs, like a giant ancient computer awaiting a command. If the correct sequence of frequencies or the right key could be applied, it might be possible to disrupt its function, or even, she dared to imagine, to reverse its suppression protocols. This wasn't merely a scientific theory, it was a blueprint for liberation, a way to potentially restore the forgotten truths to humanity. But the price of this knowledge, she knew, would be immense. The custodians, for all their claims of benevolence, were fiercely protective of their control. Her insight into the anchor's true function and her theoretical method for manipulating it would make her an even greater threat. She was no longer just a scientist who had stumbled upon a secret. She was a potential saboteur, capable of dismantling the very foundations of their power. The burden of this specific, actionable knowledge pressed down on her, an unbearable weight. She understood, with chilling clarity, that the custodians would never allow her to leave their facility alive, let alone act on her findings. This profound realization, gained in the silent confines of her cell, brought with it a renewed sense of purpose, but also an overwhelming despair. She had unlocked the ultimate forbidden discovery, the knowledge of the mechanism of suppression itself. But what good was this revelation if she remained imprisoned, unable to share it, unable to act upon it? The truth, she realized, was a double-edged sword, powerful enough to reshape the world, but also potent enough to destroy the one who wielded it. The very act of understanding the reality anchor meant she had to challenge it, to risk everything for the chance to unshackle humanity from its carefully constructed ignorance. Have you ever pondered the power that comes with defining reality for others? The sheer weight of such responsibility, or the profound corruption it could entail, is a chilling thought. This knowledge, Evelyn understood, meant she could never return to her old life. Her path was irrevocably set, forged in the crucible of forbidden truth. The weight of her knowledge, particularly the understanding of the Highland complex as an active reality anchor, capable of manipulating collective memory, became an almost unbearable burden. Evelyn was no longer merely a seeker of truth. She was a potential agent of chaotic revelation, a threat to the carefully curated stability maintained by the custodians of orthodoxy. Her insights, painstakingly pieced together in the isolation of her cell, intensified her value to her captors, but also heightened the urgency of her predicament. They needed her expertise, but they could never allow her to act on it independently. The interrogation sessions intensified, led by the gatekeeper herself. They were not physical tortures, but psychological battles of attrition, designed to break Evelyn's will, to persuade her to align with their agenda, to contribute her genius to their cause. The gatekeeper presented meticulously crafted arguments, using Evelyn's own data against her, painting vivid pictures of global pandemonium, societal collapse, and the dissolution of human identity if the reality anchor were ever truly exposed or, worse, interfered with. She spoke of humanity's fragility, its susceptibility to fear and irrationality, its inherent inability to cope with the sheer scale of the truth. "Imagine, Dr. Reed," the gatekeeper had stated, her voice devoid of inflection, "a world where every historical fact is suddenly called into question, where every religious text is exposed as a carefully constructed metaphor for a deeper, more unsettling reality, where the very notion of human exceptionalism crumbles into dust. Chaos would reign, trust would evaporate, societies would fracture, consumed by existential dread and tribalism. Is that the burden you wish to place upon billions of unsuspecting souls?" Her words resonated with a terrifying logic, preying on Evelyn's deepest fears for humanity. What right did she, a single scientist, have to inflict such turmoil on the world? This moral quandary became Evelyn's deepest struggle. Her scientific imperative, a lifelong drive to uncover and disseminate truth, clashed violently with the potential for widespread suffering. She envisioned mothers trying to explain to their children that their entire history was a lie, nations descending into warfare over conflicting origins, and the fragile fabric of human civilization tearing itself apart. The idea of causing such immense suffering, even in the name of truth, was horrifying. The burden of knowledge wasn't just hers alone. It was the potential burden of all humanity. Her confinement meant an acute separation from Alistair. She worried about him constantly, knowing his fiery intellect and uncompromising integrity would make him a difficult captive. Yet in their brief, supervised encounters, usually during carefully orchestrated discussions with the gatekeeper, she caught fleeting glances, subtle gestures that communicated a shared defiance, a silent promise to resist. They were two minds, united in their pursuit of truth, even when their immediate circumstances seemed to demand capitulation. The custodians, seeking to exploit her expertise, began to present Evelyn with fragmented data sets, challenging her to solve complex problems related to the reality anchor's energy patterns and suppression protocols. They wanted her to help them optimize its function, to ensure its continued stability, even as she secretly sought ways to bypass its controls. It was a dangerous game, a tightrope walk between collaboration and calculated sabotage. She had to appear cooperative enough to gain access to more information, but subtle enough to hide her true intentions. Every equation she solved, every theoretical adjustment she proposed, was a careful balance between appeasing her captors and furthering her own understanding of the device's vulnerabilities. During these technical deep dives, Evelyn began to discern the sheer scale of the custodians' operations. They had not merely stumbled upon the reality anchor. They had been studying and maintaining it for millennia, passing down its secrets through generations, their order evolving and adapting to each new era. Their facilities were vast, their resources seemingly limitless, their network global. They were an unseen hand guiding human history, gently nudging it along a predetermined path, weeding out any inconvenient truths that threatened to derail their carefully managed trajectory. This made her rebellion feel even more futile, a tiny spark against an overwhelming darkness. Yet a small, stubborn ember of hope persisted. The fact that the reality anchor required maintenance implied it wasn't perfect, that it had vulnerabilities, perhaps even an off switch. If she could understand its full operational parameters, if she could find the precise frequency, the exact sequence of symbols that could disrupt its core function, she might still have a chance. The irony was not lost on her. Her captors, in their desperate need for her knowledge, were inadvertently providing her with the very tools she needed to undermine them. It was a dangerous dance, fraught with peril, but Evelyn knew she had no other choice. The cost of this knowledge was becoming increasingly personal. Her old life, her academic career, her home, her quiet pleasures, all were gone, irrevocably lost. She had become a ghost in the machine, an intellectual saboteur operating from within the heart of the conspiracy. The psychological toll was immense. She slept fitfully, haunted by the images of a world plunged into chaos, and the crushing responsibility that lay solely upon her shoulders. Would you trade everything you hold dear, your freedom, your future, your very identity, for the chance to reveal a truth that might shatter the world? It's a question that echoes in the quiet corners of the mind, a testament to the profound sacrifices sometimes demanded by forbidden knowledge. Write in the comments, this is an impossible choice, if you feel the weight of Evelyn's dilemma. The ultimate ethical tightrope awaited her, a decision that would define not just her legacy, but potentially the fate of all humanity. The meticulous work Evelyn undertook within her captivity, meticulously dissecting the custodian's fragmented data and piecing together the true operational parameters of the reality anchor, began to yield results far beyond what even she had anticipated. She had moved beyond merely understanding the device's suppressive capabilities. She now understood its fundamental purpose. It wasn't just filtering information. It was a vast, ancient network, subtly influencing consciousness, guiding the trajectory of sentient life on Earth. Its purpose was not merely to maintain a false history, but to shepherd humanity, to prevent it from repeating cycles of self-destruction observed in previous non-human civilizations that had risen and fallen on the planet. The gatekeeper's claims, while authoritarian, were rooted in a terrifying historical precedent. Evelyn's breakthrough moment came during a late-night session, granted by the gatekeeper in a controlled, sterile lab, where she was tasked with optimizing an energy conduit. As she manipulated the holographic projections of the anchor's inner workings, a complex pattern emerged, correlating with Alistair's signature frequency. It was a self-repairing loop, an ancient fail-safe, but within that loop she found something else. A message, not a language in the human sense, but a sequence of resonant frequencies and geometric configurations that, when properly interpreted, formed a profound, almost telepathic transmission. This message, which Evelyn meticulously deciphered over weeks of clandestine work and mental fortitude, was staggering. It revealed that the reality anchor was indeed a legacy from a progenitor civilization, not from Earth, but from a dying star system far beyond our own. They had arrived on Earth billions of years ago, a dying race seeking to seed new life and preserve knowledge. The complex in the Scottish Highlands was one of many such anchors scattered across the globe, each designed to nurture nascent intelligence, to guide its evolution, and critically, to prevent it from repeating the catastrophic errors that had led to their own demise. The message contained warnings of the inherent instability of advanced consciousness without profound wisdom, of the dangers of unfettered technological development without ethical frameworks, and of the ultimate consequence, self-annihilation. It described how previous indigenous species on Earth, guided by these anchors, had indeed risen to immense technological heights, only to destroy themselves through hubris and internal conflict. The custodians, Evelyn now understood, were not merely a human organization. They were the chosen caretakers, a lineage trained by the anchor itself, through its subliminal influences, to maintain its functions. They believed they were following a divine, or at least a super-evolutionary directive. This revelation changed everything. The custodians were not just suppressors of truth. They were participants in a cosmic grand experiment, albeit one with an authoritarian bent. Their motivations, though extreme, were rooted in a deep inherited fear of history repeating itself. The forbidden discovery was no longer just about humanity's past, it was about its predetermined future. The burden of knowledge intensified, becoming an almost unbearable moral weight. She held in her mind not just the secret of humanity's true origins, but the cosmic context for its guided evolution. She understood the immense, terrifying responsibility the custodians felt, but she also saw the ultimate cost, humanity's true autonomy, its right to chart its own, perhaps chaotic course. The message ended with a final, tantalizing piece of information: a failsafe, a mechanism built into the core of the anchor that would allow for a complete reset of its functions, either to liberate a species from its influence, or more chillingly, to wipe the slate clean if a species proved too destructive. It was a choice, built into the very fabric of the guiding intelligence, a final, ultimate decision point. This wasn't just a key to understanding, it was a key to control. And it presented Evelyn with an impossible ethical choice. She now possessed the means to either fully activate the reality anchor to its intended benevolent but controlling capacity, essentially handing humanity's destiny over to the ancient progenitor's programming, or to disrupt it entirely, releasing humanity from its cosmic cage, but also exposing it to all the dangers the custodians warned against. The dilemma was immense. Could she, in good conscience, condemn humanity to a guided existence, however peaceful, or unleash it upon a path of potentially self-destructive freedom? The weight of this decision, for one woman in a sterile lab under the watchful eyes of her captors, was monumental. Her face, once etched with the strain of relentless intellectual pursuit, now bore the mark of profound moral anguish. Her career, her freedom, her very life, these were small prices to pay compared to the fate of a species. The custodians, in their efforts to control her, had inadvertently armed her with the ultimate weapon of truth. She understood now that they might not even be aware of the reset protocol, or perhaps they deemed it too dangerous to ever consider. Evelyn was standing at the precipice of a decision that would resonate through millennia. A silent, solitary judge of humanity's worthiness. Have you ever considered the true cost of protection, the price of being shielded from difficult truths? Is true freedom worth the inherent risk of chaos? This question, now Evelyn's to answer, forms the ultimate ethical tightrope. The very core of humanity's destiny hung in the balance, a secret entrusted to a single, isolated mind. Evelyn, armed with the horrifying and liberating knowledge of the reality anchor's true purpose and its failsafe, understood that her time was running out. The custodians, while exploiting her intellect, also knew she was a dangerous variable. The decision had to be made, and made swiftly, within the confines of her captivity. Her life was forfeit either way. The question was, what legacy would she leave? Would she betray humanity's right to self-determination or risk its catastrophic self-destruction? The reset protocol, the ultimate failsafe encoded within the reality anchor, offered two paths. One, a full activation and continued, benevolent but absolute guidance of humanity, ensuring peace and stability at the cost of genuine free will. Two, a complete deactivation of the anchor's influence, releasing humanity from its millennia-long guidance, allowing it to confront its own history, its own potential, and its own inherent dangers, unshielded. The weight of this choice pressed down on her with suffocating force, a burden no single human should ever have to bear. She revisited the progenitor civilization's warning: unbridled technological advancement without commensurate wisdom leads to ruin. The custodian's argument, though born of a controlling ideology, was not without merit. Humanity, in its current state, was volatile, prone to conflict, and seemingly incapable of managing its own destructive impulses. Releasing the full, unvarnished truth simultaneously dismantling the subtle psychological guidance provided by the anchor, could indeed plunge the world into an unimaginable abyss of chaos and despair. Mass hysteria, civil wars ignited by conflicting creation myths, the collapse of global institutions built on a fabricated history, the scenarios played out in her mind with terrifying clarity. Yet the alternative was an eternal infantilization, a future where humanity never truly grew up, never faced its own shadows, never earned its place among the stars through hard-won experience. Evelyn, a scientist who believed in the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit, found this prospect intolerable. For her, true evolution meant confronting uncomfortable realities, not being shielded from them. It was a messy, painful process, but it was the only path to genuine growth and true freedom. The freedom to choose, even if that choice led to error, was fundamental to what it meant to be human. Her chance came during a simulated operational exercise orchestrated by the gatekeeper. They needed Evelyn's specific expertise to fine-tune a section of the anchor's energy matrix, believing she was merely helping them reinforce its suppressive capabilities. But Evelyn saw the opening, a small window of opportunity to implement the reset protocol. It required precise timing, a flawless sequence of inputs, and an audacity born of desperation. As the holographic interface shimmered before her, displaying the anchor's intricate energy flows, Evelyn began her calculated defiance. With every command she entered, every frequency she adjusted, she was not optimizing for suppression, but subtly aligning the system for its ultimate deactivation. Her movements were precise, her face a mask of calm, scientific focus, betraying none of the seismic internal battle raging within her. She felt Alistair's presence, his unspoken encouragement, a silent communion of defiance. His loyalty, even under duress, was a powerful motivator. The final sequence required her to enter a series of resonant frequencies that, if incorrect, would either trigger an alarm or cause a catastrophic system overload. If successful, it would initiate the deactivation cycle. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the lab. Her fingers, despite the tension, moved with surgeon-like precision across the interface. She keyed in the last frequency, a unique harmonic derived from the progenitor message itself. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a low thrum vibrated through the floor, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within her bones. The custodians present in the lab stiffened, their expressions shifting from watchful confidence to alarm. The holographic projections of the anchor's energy matrix flickered violently, then began to shift, the deep, ancient hum growing louder, more erratic. The glowing symbols on the interface pulsed wildly, then slowly, majestically began to dim, one by one, like dying embers. The gatekeeper, her composure finally shattered, lunged forward. "What have you done, Doctor?" "Read," her voice, usually so calm, now laced with fury and fear. Evelyn, exhausted but resolute, simply met her gaze. "I've given humanity a choice, gatekeeper. Its own choice." Just then, a klaxon blared through the facility, a piercing, urgent sound that signified a critical system failure. The entire complex, which had for millennia broadcasted its subtle influence across the globe, was slowly, irrevocably, going silent. The custodians, for the first time, looked utterly lost, their control evaporating before their eyes. Evelyn had made her impossible choice. She had not chosen chaos, nor had she chosen perpetual subjugation. She had chosen freedom. The consequences for herself and for humanity would be immediate, devastating, and utterly unpredictable. But for a fleeting moment, as the lights in the lab flickered and died, she felt a profound sense of peace. Do you believe Evelyn made the right choice, giving humanity its freedom, even at the risk of its own destruction? It's a question that challenges the very core of our beliefs about self-determination and safety. What would you have done in her place? The ripple effects of her audacious act were about to reverberate across the globe, an echo of truth shaking the very foundations of human reality. The immediate aftermath of Evelyn's audacious act was a maelstrom of chaos within the custodian's clandestine facility. Alarms blared, emergency lights flickered, casting long, frantic shadows, and the air crackled with a palpable sense of panic. The gatekeeper, her face a mask of furious disbelief, ordered Evelyn's immediate restraint, but the sudden systemic collapse of the reality anchor had thrown the entire operation into disarray. Communications were down, security protocols faltered, and the highly trained agents seemed momentarily paralyzed by the unprecedented failure. In the confusion, a desperate, valiant struggle ensued, primarily orchestrated by Alistair, who, sensing the seismic shift, fought with a renewed ferocity born of hope. In the ensuing pandemonium, amidst smoke and flashing lights, Evelyn and Alistair, against all odds, managed to escape the immediate confines of the lab, vanishing into the labyrinthine corridors of the failing facility. Their escape, however, was merely the prologue to a much larger, more profound unfolding. As the reality anchor ceased its millennia-long subliminal broadcast, the world began to subtly, almost imperceptibly, change. It was not a sudden, cataclysmic event, but a creeping dawning, a quiet tremor beneath the foundations of collective consciousness. Old certainties, once rigid and unquestioned, now felt fluid, porous. Academic arguments over historical inconsistencies, once dismissed as fringe theories, suddenly gained traction. Peculiar archaeological finds, long relegated to museum basements or labeled as hoaxes, began to attract renewed, serious scrutiny. The whispers of suppressed knowledge, once faint, grew into a collective hum, a resonance of forgotten truths struggling to break free. Across the globe, scholars, historians, and even ordinary citizens experienced a subtle shift in their perception. There were no grand pronouncements from Evelyn or Alistair. Their whereabouts remained unknown, their act of defiance a silent ripple across the pond of human understanding. Instead, the changes manifested organically. A historian reviewing ancient Roman texts might suddenly see a hidden meaning in a cryptic passage, a connection previously missed. A geologist studying rock formations might realize that certain anomalies once dismissed now fit into a terrifyingly coherent, non-natural pattern. The veil had lifted, and humanity unknowingly began to see with clearer eyes, to question with a deeper intuition. The custodians, meanwhile, faced their own internal crisis. Their entire purpose, their centuries-old mission, had been predicated on maintaining the anchor's influence. Its deactivation rendered their existence meaningless, their carefully constructed reality crumbling around them. They scrambled to understand the scope of the reset, to contain the burgeoning awareness, but the truth, once unleashed, was impossible to recapture. The power they had wielded for so long had evaporated, leaving them exposed and vulnerable in a world they had meticulously shaped, but which was now reasserting its own, wilder truth. The gatekeeper, Evelyn knew, would be consumed by this failure, her life's work undone by a single act of defiance. The initial impact on global society was not the immediate chaos Evelyn had feared, but a widespread sense of unease, a pervasive feeling that something fundamental had shifted. There was a rise in philosophical and existential discussions, a new hunger for spiritual and historical truths, a collective questioning of origins that transcended national and cultural boundaries. The established narratives, while still taught, began to feel hollow, subtly challenged by an unseen undercurrent of intuition. It was as if humanity, waking from a long, comforting dream, was slowly rubbing the sleep from its eyes, beginning to recall faint, troubling memories of a different reality. Evelyn and Alistair, having successfully evaded immediate recapture, found themselves living a new, clandestine existence. They were hunted, but also liberated. Their immediate goal was to disseminate the remaining fragments of their data, the encrypted burst Evelyn had sent, hoping it would find its way into the hands of independent researchers, of those brave enough to question. They knew their personal story might never be told, their names erased from official records, but their act of defiance, the reset of the anchor, was their true legacy. The burden of knowledge had now transformed into the arduous task of nurturing truth, of guiding humanity through its awakening. The world was left with a lingering mystery, a tremor beneath its foundations. The knowledge of a progenitor civilization, of a guided evolution, was out there, not as a published exposé, but as an energetic echo, a newly available layer of perception. It forced individuals and institutions to confront the possibility that everything they thought they knew was incomplete, a carefully curated fragment of a much larger, more complex truth. The silence of the Scottish Highlands, which had cradled the reality anchor for so long, now seemed to hum with new possibilities, a monument to a past far stranger and more profound than humanity had ever dared to imagine. The forbidden discovery was no longer just an object. It was a state of being, a challenge to consciousness itself. Humanity had been given its freedom, but with that freedom came the awesome, terrifying responsibility of navigating an unscripted future, of confronting its true, unvarnished history. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but it would be humanity's journey, unburdened by ancient programming. The questions linger, hanging in the air like the mist over the Scottish hills. What new truths will humanity unearth now that the veil has lifted? What will it become when it truly understands its past? And what, ultimately, is the true cost of forbidden knowledge, both suppressed and revealed? If you've journeyed with us through this extraordinary tale, if Evelyn's plight and the monumental implications of her discovery have resonated with you, then you've arrived at a critical juncture. The story of humanity's true origins is far from over. It is, in fact, only just beginning. Comment below with Chige Ateo Fim to let us know you made it to the very end of this profound narrative. Your engagement fuels our tireless work in bringing these crucial, often unsettling stories to light. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more revelations that challenge the known world, and hit the like button to support the depth and dedication behind this content. And remember, the pursuit of truth is an ongoing journey. There's another video waiting for you on screen, delving deeper into the unexplained phenomena that hint at these hidden histories. Click on it and continue your quest for forbidden knowledge.